The streets were loud, crowded, and cold. Neon signs flickered above, casting strange blue and red light over the metal walkways. Alien citizens rushed past, their voices blending into a constant hum of orders, deals, and complaints. Smoke and steam rose from vents along the alleys, carrying the smell of fried food and burning circuits. In the middle of all this chaos, a small figure crouched low behind a broken power conduit. Her name was Ariel. She was small for her age, with green-tinted skin that glimmered faintly under the neon lights. Her eyes were large, round, and golden, watching everything carefully. She wore torn rags that barely kept her warm, and her hands were blackened from touching dirty metal and wires all day. She moved quietly, avoiding the feet of rushing aliens and the sharp whir of hovering patrol drones that scanned the streets for trouble. Ariel's life was simple in its struggle. She survived by collecting broken tech scraps. Small things like circuits, wires, and cracked data pads could be sold or traded with scavengers in the lower alleys. Some of the bigger pieces she kept, dreaming of fixing them one day, though she had no tools, no proper place, and no teacher. Survival was the first rule. Hope was the second, and she had just enough of it to keep moving. She had learned quickly that the city was not kind to her kind. Rumors said her species was weak, unwanted, and slow to grow. People avoided her or shoved her aside. She had no family, or rather no one had been seen with her in years. Some nights, when she sat under the broken neon sign of a closed shop, she whispered the names of her parents, hoping they might somehow hear her. But the only answer was the echo of the wind through the metal towers. Today had started like every other day. Ariel moved through the streets, keeping low and scanning for any scrap that might be useful. A small drone buzzed overhead, scanning faces. She froze, hiding behind a pile of rusted metal. The drone's light swept past her, then continued down the alley. She exhaled slowly, relieved, and continued her search. As she walked, she noticed a pile of broken tech that someone had thrown out. A cracked screen, a bent robotic arm, a half-broken hollow projector. Her heart skipped. She crept closer, her fingers reaching for the items. Carefully, she lifted the screen, brushing off dirt and grime. Even broken, it could be useful. She carried it back to her hidden corner, placing it carefully next to the other scraps she had collected over the past weeks. Suddenly, alarms blared across the city. A siren for street clearing, meant to push scavengers and street dwellers away from certain zones. Ariel's heart raced. She knew what that meant. Patrol drones would come, and any scavenger caught would be removed. Sometimes for hours, sometimes for longer. She hugged the screen to her chest and ran, slipping between the legs of taller aliens and ducking under neon signs. That's when she saw him. A man, tall and broad, with a worn uniform and tools hanging from his belt, was walking slowly through the crowd. He didn't rush. He didn't push anyone aside. But there was something different about him. He noticed small things. He looked around carefully, almost like he could see what others ignored. He spotted her crouched behind the power conduit, just as a patrol drone hovered closer. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't call out or make a move. Instead, he waited, watching quietly as Ariel scrambled behind another pile of debris. Then, when the drone moved past, he stepped closer, gently, without making a sound that would scare her. Ariel froze. Her heart pounded. She had learned never to trust humans. Most of them were loud, dangerous, or too busy to notice a small alien child. But something about this man was different. His eyes were calm, his movements careful. He bent slightly, not to grab her, but to look at the broken conduit she hid behind. "Hey," he said softly, almost to himself. "Are you okay there?" Ariel's golden eyes widened. She didn't answer. She didn't even move. She had no words for a human who spoke so gently. Most humans barked orders or ignored her completely. The man didn't move closer. He stayed where he was, just outside the conduit's shadow. "It's loud out here. You don't have to be alone." Alarms were still blaring, drones patrolling. Other people pushed past, ignoring them both. But the man waited. He didn't reach for her, didn't force her out. He just waited. Ariel tilted her head, curious despite herself. No one had ever waited for her before. No one had ever shown care. Even other scavengers, when they noticed her, just shook their heads or sneered. Finally, she stepped a little out from her hiding place. The man smiled faintly, but not in a teasing way, more like encouragement. "It's okay. You can stay there if you want, or you can come with me. Your choice." Ariel's hands shook. She had never had a choice before. Decisions for her were usually survival or hiding. And yet, for the first time, someone offered something different. A chance. Not food, not money, not judgment. Just an offer to be safe. The sirens faded slightly as the patrol drones moved on. But the man didn't turn away. He kept his eyes on her, patient. Ariel's curiosity and fear battled each other in her chest. She had to make a choice quickly. Stay hidden and survive alone, or step forward and risk trusting someone she didn't know. She took a small step. Then another. Her bare feet touched the cold metal. She kept her head low, but her eyes never left the man's calm face. "You're brave," he said softly as if reading her mind. "I'm Caleb. Caleb Rowan." Ariel paused. She hadn't had a name in a long time, not a real one she could use. She only had whispers of her own name, spoken quietly to herself at night. "Ariel," she said finally, almost a whisper. Caleb nodded, smiling gently. "Nice to meet you, Ariel. Don't worry. You won't be alone out here anymore." The crowd and drones continued around them, but in that small moment, Ariel felt a strange, new warmth. She had survived by herself for so long, and yet, here was someone offering her more than scraps, more than hiding. Someone offering hope. She didn't know if she could trust him fully. She didn't know what the future held. But she knew one thing, something had changed. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. And that feeling was strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. As Caleb watched her, he noticed the small bundle of scraps she had collected. He didn't say anything about it, just let her adjust and catch her breath. He knew she had learned to survive alone, but maybe, just maybe, she could learn to survive with someone beside her. The city roared around them, neon lights flickered, and patrol drones continued their slow watch. But for one small alien girl, crouched in a cold, metal street, the world suddenly seemed a little less cruel. And for Caleb Rowan, a single father who had long thought he could only care for his own son, a new responsibility began to bloom in his heart, one that might just change both of their lives forever. Every day, Caleb returned to the same part of the crowded city streets. The neon lights flickered above, and the hum of engines and voices never stopped. But one corner had caught his attention. A small figure, crouched behind a pile of broken metal, waited quietly, eyes alert and cautious. Ariel had returned again. Caleb noticed her before she even saw him. She moved carefully, collecting scraps of metal and tiny wires from the ground. She was small, fast, and silent, like a shadow slipping between the neon lights. Caleb watched for a moment, then left without saying anything. The next day he brought something small, a packet of synthetic food and a warm patch, the kind workers used under their uniforms on cold nights. He placed them near the pile of metal where he had seen her hiding. Then he stepped back and waited. Ariel came out slowly from her hiding spot. She spotted the food and tilted her head. Hunger had taught her to be cautious, but curiosity won over. She crept forward, eyes scanning for traps or danger. There was none. The food was real. The warm patch was soft. Her small hands reached for it carefully, touching it and then sniffing it. The next day she returned. And the day after that. Caleb continued leaving small gifts, never forcing her, never approaching too closely. The human city workers noticed. Some laughed quietly when they saw him crouching near the corner, speaking softly to a small alien. "You're wasting your time," one said, shaking his head. "That thing will never be more than street trash." Caleb ignored them. He knew the streets could be cruel. He had learned it long ago. But he had also learned that kindness mattered, even when no one noticed. And Ariel, she mattered. For Ariel, these small gifts were strange and new. She had learned to survive alone. She had learned not to trust. And yet, she began to look for the human each day. Sometimes she would sit behind the metal pile, waiting for him to leave something. Sometimes she would watch him from the shadows, noticing the way he moved, the way he spoke to machines, the way he glanced around the street to make sure no one was in danger. She began to understand slowly that he was different. He didn't see her as useless. He didn't see her as a problem. He saw her. And for Ariel, that was enough to make her step closer. One evening, after Caleb had left a small stack of food and a warm patch, she picked up the items and studied them carefully. She tucked the food into a small bag she had patched together from scraps. She carried the warm patch close to her chest. She didn't know if she could trust him fully, but something in his calm presence felt safe. Caleb watched from a distance. He had lost his wife 2 years ago during the colony relocation accident. The city had changed and he had tried to rebuild his life. His young son Milo was the only family he had left. Raising a child alone was difficult, but Caleb had learned to manage. He fixed broken machines, worked long shifts, and taught Milo what he could about the world. Now, seeing Ariel cautiously move through the streets, Caleb felt a small tug in his heart. He remembered nights when he and his wife had dreamed of a larger family, of teaching children to see the good in the galaxy. Those dreams had ended in tragedy, leaving only Milo and him. But now there was another life to protect. Another soul to care for. The next few days were the same. Caleb left small gifts, watched from a distance, and never forced interaction. Ariel, in turn, began leaving small scraps for him, arranging wires and pieces of metal neatly where he could find them. It was her way of saying thank you, though she didn't know words for it yet. Other aliens noticed too. Some snickered, some whispered, but Caleb ignored them. He had learned the value of patience. He had learned that change was slow, but it could begin with small acts. One morning, as Ariel approached her corner, she noticed something different. The streets were louder than usual. Alarms echoed from the city towers. Patrol drones buzzed overhead, scanning the alleys more carefully than normal. Caleb spotted the same signals. City enforcement was clearing the street scavengers. They were taking anyone who lived or worked on the streets and relocating them to designated zones. Some of these zones were crowded, uncomfortable, and far from the main city. But enforcement did not care about comfort. They only cared about order. Ariel froze. She had learned to move fast, to hide, but these patrols were different. They would not tolerate hesitation. Her heart pounded in her chest. She clutched her bag of scraps and the warm patch Caleb had left the night before. She had no home, no family, and now, for the first time, no safe place on the streets. Caleb noticed her panic. Without thinking, he stepped closer, putting himself between her and the patrolling drones. He spoke softly, low enough for her to hear. "It's okay, Ariel. Stay close to me. We'll be safe." Ariel hesitated, looking at him. Could she trust him now, when danger was so close? Her instincts screamed to run, to hide, to survive alone. But something in his calm, steady voice made her pause. She moved closer, almost instinctively, and he reached out a hand, not grabbing her, just offering. The drones passed by, their lights scanning the street. Caleb kept his eyes on them, shielding Ariel with his body. He whispered quietly, reassuringly, until the danger moved on. Only when the last drone had gone did he relax, a small sigh escaping him. Ariel looked up at him, golden eyes wide. She didn't understand words fully yet, but she felt the promise in his actions. She felt that someone cared enough to risk for her. She had never known this before. Caleb bent down slightly, speaking softly again. "You don't have to do this alone. Not anymore. We can figure things out together." Ariel didn't answer with words. She only nodded slightly, still clutching her small bag of scraps. But inside something shifted. She had been alone for so long, always hiding, always running. And now, for the first time, she felt the faintest warmth of safety and trust. The streets remained loud and unforgiving, the neon lights flickered, and the hum of engines never stopped. But in that small corner, amid the chaos of the city, two lives had begun to connect. Caleb and Ariel. Human and alien. Stranger and survivor. And as city enforcement continued their sweep, moving past and taking other scavengers, Caleb knew this was only the beginning. The streets were dangerous, the city was harsh, but he would not let her face it alone. Not now. Not ever. For Ariel, it was the first step in learning that not all humans were cruel. For Caleb, it was a reminder that even after loss, even after tragedy, life could still bring moments worth protecting. And in the quiet understanding between them, a fragile trust had begun to bloom, one that might one day grow into something stronger, brighter, and life-changing. The streets were unusually busy that morning. Patrol drones hummed overhead, their lights scanning the alleys more closely than ever. City enforcement had begun a forced sweep to clear scavengers, street dwellers, and anyone seen as unregistered in the lower districts. Ariel moved quickly, clutching her bag of scraps, eyes darting to every shadow and doorway. She had learned to hide, to run, to survive, but today something felt different. She wasn't fast enough. A drone spotted her near the corner she had come to call safe. Its red scanning light passed over her, and a mechanical voice called out, warning her to come forward. Panic surged through her small body. She darted behind a pile of metal, but the enforcement officers were close. Their hands reached for her before she could escape. "You don't belong here," one of them said, voice flat and cold. "Move or be taken to the holding zone." Ariel shook her head, backing away, but there was no path left. The officer stepped closer, reaching for her. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Her heart pounded in her chest, faster than ever before. She had never been so close to capture. Then a voice cut through the chaos. "Come. Steady. Human. Wait." The officers froze slightly. Caleb stepped forward from the shadows, holding up a small metallic badge that glinted under the neon lights. She is with me. She is not a threat. The lead officer glanced at him, frowning. Your credentials don't cover street residents. She must come with us. Caleb did not argue angrily. He did not push or shout. He kept his voice calm and even, letting authority and care flow through his words. I am a registered worker in this district, he said quietly. I can assure you she is safe with me. If she is taken, she will panic and likely be harmed. Please allow me to escort her. The officer hesitated. Caleb had a reputation as a careful and reliable worker. The other humans and aliens in the area noticed his calm demeanor, and slowly the patrol team backed slightly, scanning him carefully. Caleb's heart raced, but he stayed steady. He could not let Ariel be taken. Ariel froze in place, eyes wide, staring at Caleb. She didn't understand all his words, but she felt the calm strength in them. She felt safe. For the first time, someone had stepped in for her, not with force or anger, but with quiet authority and care. You can stay with him?" she whispered almost to herself. Caleb nodded once. "Yes. Stay close. I've got you." The patrol drones continued scanning, but Caleb guided Ariel away from the open street. He shielded her with his body and slowly led her down a narrow side alley. One of the officers muttered something about recording the event, and Caleb knew he would be noted for misusing worker authority. It didn't matter. He would accept any punishment, any points on his record to keep her safe. Once they were out of the immediate danger, Caleb crouched to meet her eyes. "You're okay now," he said softly. "No one can take you if I'm here. Do you understand?" Ariel nodded slowly. Her hand still clutched the bag of scraps. She had never felt this safe before. The feeling was strange and warm, almost dizzying. She wanted to trust him but didn't know how fully yet. Just then a small voice called from behind. "Dad." Caleb turned to see Milo, his young son, running toward them. His hair was messy and he carried something small and glowing in his hands. "Who's this?" Milo asked softly, looking at Ariel. "This is Ariel," Caleb said quietly, careful not to alarm her. "She's a friend. She needs help." Milo stepped closer. He held out a small object wrapped carefully in a piece of cloth. When Ariel looked, she saw a tiny light toy repaired and glowing softly. The light pulsed gently like a small heartbeat. "I fixed it," Milo said proudly. "It was broken. I thought you might like it." Ariel's eyes widened. She had never received a gift before, never anything made with care. Slowly she reached out and took the toy. The warmth of the light and the kindness behind it made her chest ache. Then for the first time in her life she laughed, a soft, musical laugh that echoed softly against the metal walls. Caleb smiled, watching her reaction. Milo's small act had unlocked something that no words could have. The sound of her laughter was fragile, but it was also strong. It carried hope, curiosity, and a small joy she had never known. Ariel looked at Milo, then at Caleb. For a moment she felt a strange confusion of emotions: fear, relief, curiosity, and a budding trust. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if the streets would stay dangerous, or if the city would allow her to stay safe. But for the first time she had people looking out for her. Not strangers, not predators, but family in a quiet, growing sense. Caleb knelt beside her, careful not to crowd. "You're safe now," he said softly again. "We'll figure things out. Together." Ariel nodded, holding the glowing toy close. She didn't speak, but she felt a question forming in the back of her mind. Could she really trust humans? Could she stay safe with them? The thought was frightening, but Caleb didn't ask her the question. He simply waited, giving her space to decide in her own time. Milo bounced on his toes. "Do you want to come with us?" he asked shyly. His voice was hopeful, full of a child's innocent belief in goodness. Ariel paused, looking at him and then at Caleb. Her golden eyes reflected the soft glow of Milo's toy. She didn't answer. Not yet. She only held the light close and let herself feel something she hadn't allowed in a long time: safety, curiosity, and the warmth of kindness. The streets continued to buzz around them, neon lights flickering in erratic patterns. Drones hummed overhead, but Caleb had shielded her from the worst of it. The chaos of the city continued, but in that small corner, a fragile trust had begun to form. One human, one small alien girl, and a child who believed that everyone deserved a chance. Ariel laughed again, softly this time, her small voice blending with the hum of the city. Caleb glanced at Milo, then back at Ariel, and something settled in his heart. He didn't ask her if she wanted to come home yet. That question would wait. For now, the moment itself was enough. A new life was beginning, small and fragile but full of hope. And as the patrols moved on and the drones buzzed away, Caleb Rowan, single father and worker, realized that protecting one small alien girl could change not just her life, but the way he saw his own. Trust had been given, safety had been offered, and laughter had returned where none had existed before. For Ariel, the world felt slightly less lonely. For Caleb, the quiet responsibility of care felt larger than ever. And together they stepped through the alley into a new day, one filled with fragile hope, gentle courage and the possibility of family. Caleb sat in the small maintenance room, the hum of machinery filling the air. He stared at the city data terminal, scrolling through reports about scavenger populations and species records. His eyes grew heavier with every line he read. Then he stopped, staring at a report marked in red. Ariel species had been declared non-productive years ago. Quietly, systematically, they had been abandoned. There were no relocation plans, no adoption programs, nothing. They were left to survive alone, invisible to the city, considered unnecessary. Caleb felt a tight knot form in his chest. How could a city decide that a life was meaningless? That a child, small and frightened, could be left alone on the streets because her species was deemed non-productive? His hands clenched around the edge of the terminal. He had lost his wife during the colony relocation and had spent years raising Milo alone. He knew the pain of loss, of helplessness, and he refused to let it happen to Ariel. The city regulations were clear. Adoption across species was forbidden. A human could not legally take in an alien child. Even if the alien was orphaned, the system refused to allow it. Caleb understood the rules, but he also understood something else. Rules were not always right. He typed a request into the adoption system anyway. Carefully, formally, he stated his case. He explained that Ariel was alone, vulnerable, and in need of care. He argued that a responsible human adult could provide her with protection and guidance. The city AI responded immediately. Denied. The explanation was bureaucratic, cold, and final. Cross-species adoption is forbidden. Child remains under observation by city authorities. Caleb let out a slow breath, leaning back in his chair. He had expected this response. The city would not bend its rules. But he had taken the first step. Even if it failed, he had made his intentions known. That mattered. It showed the city, and perhaps himself, that he would not ignore a child in need. That night, the city streets were darker than usual. A sudden power outage had knocked out several sectors of the lower districts. Neon lights flickered and went out, and the hum of drones stopped in midair. Shadows stretched long across the alleys, and the usual hum of engines and voices was replaced by the occasional shout or scurry of someone moving through the dark. Caleb grabbed a portable light and a small bag of supplies. He called for Milo, who ran quickly to his side. "We have to check on her," Caleb said quietly. "She could be out there alone." The two of them moved carefully through the alleys, the darkness pressing around them. Every shadow could hide danger. Every empty corner seemed more threatening without the usual glow of the neon lights. Caleb's heart raced, but he kept his steps steady. Milo clutched a small light toy, the one he had given Ariel earlier, and held it close. They found her near the corner where Caleb had first seen her weeks ago. She was crouched low, trembling, hugging her bag of scraps tightly to her chest. Her golden eyes reflected fear and confusion, wide in the dim light. The sudden outage had thrown her world into darkness, and she had no one to protect her. "Ariel," Caleb said softly, kneeling down so he was level with her. He kept his voice calm, gentle, and warm. "It's okay. We're here. You're not alone." Ariel shook slightly, unsure. She had been alone for so long that the presence of someone who truly cared felt strange, almost unreal. She wanted to trust, but trust had always brought danger in her life. Her instincts screamed to run, to hide, to survive alone. Caleb reached out a hand slowly, careful not to scare her. "Do you want to come home?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There was no force in his tone, only an offer, only patience. Ariel stared at the hand. For a moment nothing happened. Her mind raced with fear and hesitation. The city had rules, the streets had dangers, and yet this human kneeled before her, offering something she had never had: safety, care, and a choice. Then, slowly she reached out. Her small, trembling hand met his. She did not speak, but her eyes spoke volumes. She would trust him. She would step forward into something new, something unknown. She would take the first step toward a home. Caleb felt a weight lift from his chest. He had offered and she had accepted. No words were needed beyond that single, simple gesture. Her trust was a gift, fragile but strong. Milo stepped closer, holding his glowing toy toward her. "I knew you'd come back," he said softly. "I wanted to make sure you had this." Ariel accepted the toy, and for the first time that night she allowed herself to smile. The glow of the toy reflected in her eyes, and she laughed softly, a sound Caleb had come to treasure. It was a sound of hope, of life, of the possibility that the darkness of the streets could not touch her anymore. Caleb stood slowly, still holding her hand, and looked at Milo. His son's small act of kindness had helped bridge the gap of fear and uncertainty for Ariel. Caleb realized that family was not just about rules or blood, it was about care, protection, and trust. They moved slowly through the darkened streets, Caleb shielding Ariel with his body, Milo walking at her side. Each step was careful, but it was a step forward into a life that had once seemed impossible for her. A life where she could be safe, cared for, and seen. As they reached the first building with lights restored, Ariel paused and looked up at Caleb. She did not speak, but her grip on his hand tightened slightly. It was an answer to the question he had asked. Yes, she wanted to come home. Caleb's heart swelled with relief and quiet joy. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. The city would not immediately change its rules. There would be bureaucratic obstacles, whispers, and perhaps even resistance. But for now, the most important thing was done. Ariel had a choice, and she had chosen trust. The streets remained dim and quiet, the neon lights flickered back to life, and the hum of the city returned. But in that small, dark alley, a new beginning had formed. One human, one small alien girl, and a child who had already shown the power of small acts of kindness. For the first time in years, Ariel felt warmth, safety, and hope. For Caleb, he felt the quiet strength of purpose, the knowledge that doing the right thing even against rules was worth every risk. And together, hand in hand, they walked toward the uncertain but promising light of a new home. The story of Ariel and Caleb spread quickly through the city. Security footage from the night Caleb had found her during the blackout circulated on public channels. Citizens paused their routines to watch a human kneeling in the dark streets, offering safety and care to a small, trembling alien girl. His calm words, his patience, and the gentle way he shielded her from patrol drones caught the attention of many. People were surprised. Some had assumed that humans only cared for themselves, that they followed rules blindly, or that survival meant ignoring those who were weaker. But here was a human who had chosen compassion over law, kindness over bureaucracy. The image of him holding Ariel's hand while she clutched the glowing toy his son had repaired became iconic. Debates began in public forums and city channels. Citizens replayed the footage again and again. Commentators discussed what it meant for the future of the city. People from different species argued and shouted, but slowly a consensus began to form. Rules were not always right. Life, care, and protection mattered more. Caleb continued his work as usual, careful not to appear boastful or self-important. He did not speak about his actions publicly. He focused on his small family, raising Milo and caring for Ariel as she slowly became comfortable in his home. But even without his words, the story of his courage and compassion grew. The city council could not ignore it. Officials who had once dismissed cross-species adoption began to feel pressure. Citizens demanded change. Activists pointed to the footage as evidence that humans and other species could make choices guided by care, not fear. The council met, debated, and finally issued a new policy. Cross-species family units would be allowed, regulated for safety but legal and protected. Ariel's adoption process began immediately. There were still forms to fill, approvals to gain, and bureaucrats to convince, but the path was open now. Caleb and Milo attended every meeting, helping Ariel understand each step. She learned that home was not just a hiding place, not just a corner in the streets. It was a place where she could belong, where she could be safe, and where she could be loved. The day the adoption was finalized was quiet but full of joy. Caleb watched as the officials stamped the last papers, confirming that Ariel was legally part of his family. Milo cheered quietly, bouncing on his toes, holding his repaired toy proudly. Ariel hugged both of them, her small arms wrapping around them tightly. She laughed, a full, clear laugh that echoed in their small apartment. It was a sound of victory, safety, and belonging. Neighbors congratulated them, friends from the work district visited, and even some aliens who had watched the footage reached out with small gifts or words of kindness. Ariel felt the weight of loneliness lift from her shoulders. She was home. She had family. And for the first time, the streets no longer felt like a place of fear. Over the years, historians and city scholars would return to that night during the blackout. They described it as a turning point, a moment when one human's choice reshaped the laws and the hearts of citizens. They recorded the small acts of Milo, the quiet courage of Caleb, and the fragile trust Ariel had shown. They noted how compassion had triumphed over strict rules, and how the city had learned that survival was not just about strength, it was about care. Humanity's reputation grew beyond fear and power. Where once humans were known as conquerors or rulers, they began to earn another title: Guardians of the Forgotten. This title was not given lightly. It symbolized the willingness of humans to protect those who had been abandoned, overlooked, or dismissed by society. The story of Ariel and Caleb became a symbol of that title, a story told in classrooms, city forums, and even on distant colony worlds. Ariel grew in this environment of care and protection. She learned to read, to play, and to trust. She still collected scraps from time to time, but now it was for fun, for learning, and for curiosity, not survival. She watched Caleb fix machines and gadgets, often helping him, and she learned the joy of creating rather than just scavenging. Milo became her closest friend and protector, always encouraging her, always showing that family could be chosen, nurtured, and loved. Caleb watched them together, his heart full. He remembered the first day he had seen Ariel hiding behind the power conduit, terrified and alone. He had stepped forward then, unsure of what he could do, but driven by something stronger than fear, the need to protect. And now, years later, the results were clear. One small act of courage had rippled through the city, changing laws, hearts, and expectations. The city, once harsh and unforgiving to the weak, now had families of mixed species living openly. Humans, aliens, and hybrids shared homes, streets, and communities. The idea that anyone could be left behind simply because of origin was challenged, questioned, and ultimately changed. And the story of a small alien girl, a single father, and his son reminded everyone that change often begins with simple acts of care. On quiet nights, Caleb would sit with Ariel and Milo, telling them stories of the old city, of the rules that had once kept children like her alone, and of the choices humans had made that had rewritten the story. Ariel would listen with wide eyes, holding the glowing toy Milo had fixed, understanding that the world could be harsh, but that kindness was stronger. And long after Caleb and Milo were gone, and Ariel had grown and taught the next generation, the story remained. Historians marked that night as the moment humans earned their greatest reputation, not as conquerors or rulers but as protectors, as guardians. Guardians of those forgotten, abandoned, or overlooked. The city continued to hum, neon lights flickered, and drones flew overhead. Streets were still crowded and noisy, but now, in small homes, quiet corners, and warm lights, life was safer for the vulnerable. And every time someone heard the story of Caleb, Milo, and Ariel, they remembered the power of simple kindness, the courage to protect, and the truth that even one human's choice could change the course of many lives. Ariel, now fully part of her family, looked out at the city from the apartment balcony, Milo at her side, Caleb smiling behind them. She breathed in the lights, the sounds, and the safety, knowing that she belonged. And in that moment the world felt right. The story of a single choice, a single act of compassion, had changed not just one life, but an entire city. And the legacy of that choice lived on, marking humanity as more than survivors or rulers, but as guardians capable of seeing, valuing, and protecting the forgotten.